I'm Roger Stone, and you're at the right place. You're at the War Room with Roger Stone and Owen Schroyer. This is our expanded programming, the brainchild of Alex Jones, and supported by our listeners who religiously and loyally go to the Infowars.com store to support the broadcast. We ask you again to be generous because it's a win-win. We are the resistance, we are the tip of the spear, and we need your support. We don't have a bunch of Wall Street billionaires or foreign oligarchs writing multi-million-dollar checks to keep us afloat here at Infowars. No support from the Ford Foundation or the Rockefeller Foundation or George Soros. We have to depend only on you and your generosity and your loyal support for InfoWars. Owen, I am shocked at the way the worm has turned in Washington. A week is a lifetime in American politics, and with the new revelations about Uranium-1, coupled with what we learned yesterday about Robert Mueller getting preferential treatment to be included as an investor in a Soros-run hedge fund, it seems to me that the Democrats' entire narrative seems to be collapsing around their very ears.
Well, we're having the narrative collapse too, Roger, right in front of their faces, but for some reason, their minions don't understand this. I mean, today, you have a guy protesting at the White House, throwing out Russian flags, saying treason. You have Tom Steyer buying a $10 million national television ad campaign saying we need to impeach Trump. So it's like they don't even care. They're pathological liars at this point. They believe their own lies. And it doesn't matter that the whole Russian collusion thing has fallen back onto the Democrats. They're still moving forward with their conspiracy theories that it was Trump and the Russians.
Well, one big victory today, the very first scalp for the belt of Steve Bannon, Rhino Senator Jeff Flake of Arizona announces that rather than fight for his seat, he will retire. This is going to send shockwaves through the nation's capital. Now, the truth is, President Donald Trump had the opportunity to take out politically, of course, Senator John McCain in the 2016 Arizona Republican U.S. Senate primary. Jared Kushner, his son-in-law, and others convinced the president that he should do his party duty and, albeit reluctantly, endorse John McCain. He did so. He has been repaid with nothing but treachery from that time. Anyone who has seen some of McCain's recent performances realize that this is a man out of control. Now, Senator McCain's meltdowns, his red-faced temper tantrums, his fits are a thing of legend in the U.S. Capitol. They are well known. But what I notice is the senator gets particularly agitated when you start to ask him hard questions. Why, Senator McCain, did you take $1 million into the McCain Institute from the Saudi government at the same time you, Senator, were opposing the release of the congressional report which outlined the role of the Saudi royal family in 9/11? Why, Senator McCain, did you meet with Oleg Deripaska, a oligarch and Russian money man who is particularly close to Vladimir Putin? As John Solomon with Circa News then reported, now of the Hill, the FBI warned McCain twice that Deripaska was a Russian agent, and McCain insisted on meeting with him anyway. So the mainstream media is right. There was a Republican presidential candidate in bed with Putin, soliciting money from Putin. Unfortunately, that was John McCain, not Donald Trump. So Mr. Flake has read the handwriting on the wall. Hard-charging State Senator Kelly Ward, who ran a more than respectable race against McCain in 2016, is back for another challenge, and the first rhino has bitten the dust. How many others will look at the daunting challenge being put together by Mr. Bannon and others and decide that the easiest path may be retirement? There is no question that the special election in Alabama was the shot heard round the world. Here you had the candidate who was the closest to Trumpism, but not endorsed by the president himself, defeating the establishment candidate who was only reluctantly endorsed by the president. What does this show? Some would say it shows that the president's endorsement has no oomph, has no power. I think that's the wrong conclusion. What it shows us is that Trumpism is more powerful and popular than the president himself. In other words, people like Donald Trump not just for the man he is, but for the things he stands for. And therefore, this is the most powerful influence in the Republican Party today. I would not want to be a member of Congress, House, or Senate and be actively opposed by the president of my own party in the primary. But Donald Trump looks to me like a man who is preserving his options. I don't think, as I said in the first segment, that he will unilaterally endorse all of the conservative challengers being recruited by Steve Bannon and his allies, nor do I think he will endorse none of them. But the defeat of just one rhino, the defeat, in this case, the withdrawal from Rhino Jeff Flake, has an impact on others still in the caucus who have to vote on the proposals of this administration. Right now, the Senate version of the budget, far more generous, a lot more spending, a lot fewer cuts than the House version of that budget. And lo and behold, the White House is leaning on House members to support the Senate version. When are they going to learn that expanding the swamp is not going to solve our problems? Joining me in the next segment is St. John Hunt, the author, researcher, musician, singer, songwriter, son of the legendary CIA operative E. Howard Hunt. And we'll be looking to Mr. Hunt to talk to us about the import and the impact of the JFK classified documents that President Trump elected to announce he would declassify after I spoke to him last Thursday morning. The deep state is abuzz over what these documents may reveal. They're probably even a bit more of a tizzy trying to figure out how to redact and withhold and hold back as much information as possible. And right now, there are bureaucrats somewhere in a conference room feverishly trying to figure out a way to stop the American people from getting the truth. We cannot let the president's bold, courageous decision be nullified by a bunch of deep state bureaucrats. Joining me later in the program, Dr. Jerome Corsi, who has examined the batch of documents released in July by the National Archives that pertain to the Kennedy assassination and finds them wanting, finds them overly redacted and with too much material withheld. I'm Roger Stone, you're on The War Room, and we'll be right back. Welcome back. I'm Roger Stone, joined by my colleague Owen Schroyer, and you are here at The War Room. This is the expanded programming mandated by Alex Jones, and we are on our way to a day when we have round-the-clock InfoWars. But today we're now standing at great live programming at almost 10 hours a day, so you never need to be without your InfoWars fix. Joining me now is a man that I have come to respect as a true Renaissance man. He is not only a brilliant writer and researcher, author of his own books, but he is also a singer, songwriter, poet, and troubadour. I refer, of course, to my friend St. John Hunt. St. John, welcome to the War Room.
Thanks, Roger, very much for having me. And yes, everything you said was true. So I'm happy to be on your show.
Now, thank you. Now, I know that you had millions of viewers only a little while ago when you were on with Alex Jones, but I could not resist the opportunity to have you join me. We're going to take it a little bit differently because you and I have co-authored a terrific book called The Bush Crime Family, now out in paperback and available at Amazon or Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, soon to be available on the Infowars.com store site. And this is the definitive biography of the entire Bush family. Many people are unaware of the fact that the family patriarch Prescott Bush made the initial family fortune by financing the armament of the Third Reich, by arming the Nazi war regime, and that federal regulators seized his bank, Union Bank, for treasonous activities during the run-up to the financing of Hitler's war machine. And I think a lot of people don't know that the 1992 JFK Records Release Act, which was signed into law, ironically, by President George H.W. Bush, who felt that he had little choice because of the public clamor that had been caused by Oliver Stone's great movie, JFK, and the earlier revelations of the House Assassinations Committee. Bush essentially signed into law a law that would turn around and expose him as having lied about his whereabouts on November 26, 1963, lied about where he was the day before, lied about where he was the day after, and then, incredibly, said for 30 years he could not remember where he was the day John Kennedy was killed. So we have a terrific piece of scholarship in the Bush crime family, but few men know the actual secrets of the Kennedy assassination in the way St. John Hunt does. If you would, recap the experience with your father at the time of his life that he is literally has one foot in the grave. He is on his deathbed, and that is when you and Alex Jones shock the world with what you learn.
Well, that's very true, Roger. It was very late in my father's life, and he was very near death. He'd had a lot of complications with pneumonia. He had gangrene in his leg, which had been amputated and worked on 2 different times. And but there was a little bit of fight left in him. His mind was very clear. His body was failing him, but his mind was strong. And he wanted to set the record straight. I must take some credit for prompting him to do so. In the last year or 2 of his life, there had been many accusations against my father, saying that he was a participant in the JFK assassination, and I wanted to know if that was true or not. I mean, I felt that I could reach my father on a level that very few other people could. In other words, he's been compelled to answer that question in front of the Senate and the Congress, and he denied it all those times. But when it was just him and I by the hospital bed that he was laying in, he unraveled a story to me about his prior knowledge of the JFK assassination. And this, to me, was a monumental thing that he did. It wasn't out of guilt. I must clear this up. He didn't feel guilty about having prior knowledge or being involved in the JFK assassination. He was proud of his actions. He truly and deeply felt that John F. Kennedy was a threat to national security, and as did certainly many others in the industrial complex, the military-industrial complex. Johnson certainly felt Jack Kennedy was a threat on many levels. So he laid out this information, and we talked about a lot of things. We talked about some of the files that had been taken from him during Watergate, and his blackmailing of Richard Nixon, these information that he had that was just political dynamite, as Bob Woodward described in his book about the contents of his safe. So it was a very long and secretive process that my father and I embarked on to get to the root of the matter. And he passed away before the entire story could be told. But he did tell me enough, and I did as he wished, which was to release the information to the press as best as I could after he passed away. And within 2 months of his death, I succeeded in getting Rolling Stone magazine to unleash the information. Of course, it was passed up by the mainstream media. That was no surprise. But to those that want the truth and know the truth, I feel that my dad was very brave in revealing to me that he had prior knowledge and that he was involved, as he put it, a bench warmer in the assassination attempt. And that started the whole show for me, as far as trying to understand what the parameters of my father's responsibilities within the JFK assassination were. And I'm hoping with the release of these files in just a short amount of time, I think, Wednesday at midnight or Thursday at midnight, they have 400 pages on E. Howard Hunt. And I don't know if that's a lot compared to other persons in the files, but to me, I'm excited about seeing what's in those files. Because I think it was things in those files that my mother was taken to Chicago, which caused her death. So it's going to be very, very revealing to me, and I'm excited, but I'm nervous about it too.
Well, for those of you who are not familiar, St. John's Hunt Dorothy, about his mother, kind of a companion book to his first book, which was really about his father and the effect of Watergate on his family. Dorothy is a terrific book. Welcome back. I'm Roger Stone. You're here at the War Room, and we're joined by the writer, researcher, troubadour, Renaissance man, St. John Hunt, who I confess right up front is one of my closest friends and a man that I greatly admire. St. John, I am interested in clearing up a little confusion. According to the Associated Press, the document dump mandated by President Donald Trump for full disclosure from the JFK assassination files is said to include your father's super secret diaries. Again, I'm quoting them. There is some belief that L. Patrick Gray, who was the FBI director briefly under Nixon at the height of the Watergate cover-up, burned documents, books that belonged to your father. And it was thought by some that those had been the legendary Hunt diaries. I now believe that what was burned during Watergate must have been an operational notebook for Watergate, and that the deepest secrets of E. Howard Hunt, the secrets that he pulled the curtain up on in his deathbed discussions with you may well be memorialized in these documents that the president has just ordered released.
Yes, I agree with you, Roger. It's well known that L. Patrick Gray burned two tablets, notebooks that were taken from my father's personal safe in the old executive office building the day after the Watergate burglary team had been arrested by John Dean's orders and given to L. Patrick Gray, who kept them till Christmas that December, and then he burned them. Those were operational notebooks in regards to the various operations and missions that my father had undertaken in his role as the leader of the plumbers, the Special Investigation Unit for the White House, for Richard Nixon. But the real secretive stuff was, I believe, there was copies that my mother had, which would account for the tremendous pressure that Nixon felt that Hunt had over him. And you can hear President Nixon on the White House tapes ranting and raving about Hunt. He knows too much, and open that scab, and it's going to make a lot of people look bad. It's going to make the CIA look bad. It's going to blow open the whole Bay of Pigs thing, which in later volumes by Haldeman and by Woodward and Bernstein, it was a way that Richard Nixon referred to the JFK assassination. He referred to it as the Bay of Pigs sting, because it was all related to that. And I believe that in these files, we may just find what it was that my father had on Richard Nixon, which I believe was Richard Nixon's knowledge of the fact that many members of the anti-Castro assassination squad that my father was involved with and that Nixon approved during his tenure as vice president would come to light, would show that President Nixon was aware that these same assassins had turned their guns from Castro to President Kennedy, and I think that's the least of what we could hope to find in these files, if they are in fact the real files.
I think you've just put your finger on it. We now know what E. Howard Hunt knew, which is that the Central Intelligence Agency had teamed up with the mob in an effort to whack Fidel Castro. Why? When Castro took power in Cuba, all of the known assets of the intelligence agencies were expelled. But because the organized crime families still owned casinos in operation in Cuba, they still had people on the ground, people who could collect intelligence about the Castro regime. There's no doubt whatsoever, as Vice President of the United States, that Richard Nixon green-lighted this effort put together by Robert Mayu, formerly of the FBI, and elements of organized crime, including Carlos Marcello, Sam Giancana, and others, to kill Fidel Castro. And the thought was that perhaps that some blowback was responsible for the resultant killing of John Kennedy. Now, in my book, The Making of the President, The Man Who Killed Kennedy, the case against LBJ, I argue that you had multiple institutions who had individual motives for the replacement of John Kennedy. The Central Intelligence Agency upset about the Bay of Pigs and the Cuban Missile Crisis. The organized crime upset because they had financed John Kennedy's election. But the Attorney General of the Kennedy administration, Robert Kennedy, was seeking to deport Carlos Marcello and Santo Trafficante in violation of a deal they felt they had made with Ambassador Joseph Kennedy when they gave him $1 million to aid in the election of Jack Kennedy. And then, of course, there's Big Texas Oil. They were unhappy about Kennedy's efforts to repeal the oil depletion allowance. E. Howard Hunt, it seems to me, told us two incredibly important things. One, the assassination was a CIA operation. He was on the ground there himself, although, as he put it, a backbencher. And the most important thing he told you, LBJ was running the show. That is, of course, the theme of my book, The Man Who Killed Kennedy. And I consider E. Howard Hunt one of the foremost authorities on what really happened that day. St. John, I thank you very much for joining us. I know that you had a great interview with Alex Jones. You are a great patriot, and just keep on writing.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Roger. It's great to be being seen with you.
All right. In our next interview here, I'm seeking to find Dr. Jerry Corsi. Dr. Corsi has written a spectacular book on the Kennedy assassination himself. He reached the same conclusion I did after years of research, that Lyndon Johnson had the motive, means, and opportunity, that there is eyewitness evidence and fingerprint evidence, as well as deep Texas politics, which ties him irrevocably to the murder of John Kennedy. It is Dr. Corsi who first expressed to me a concern that the deep state, now having been overruled by President Trump, who did not listen to their entreaties to simply put the release of these documents off for 25 years. It is Dr. Corsi's concern, I think a legitimate one, that the government will now seek to redact so much of this material and hold so much of it back that these files are worthless to researchers or those who are seeking the truth. Think of the public reaction, given the what I think has been favorable public impact of the president's decision to opt for transparency and for full disclosure, if the American people were to learn that the president's decision had simply been nullified through the back door, that government bureaucrats were now trying to block what the president had ordered. I'm Roger Stone. You're at the War Room. We're going to keep talking about the JFK assassination and what it is we hope to find from these newly released files. I'm Roger Stone, and you're on the War Room here at InfoWars. Now I'm joined by my colleague, Dr. Jerome Corsi, who is the Washington Bureau Chief of InfoWars. Dr. Corsi is one of the few men that I know who actually knew Senator John F. Kennedy. He has written his own brilliant book on the Kennedy assassination, which jibed with my own book. We both believe Lyndon Baines Johnson is a principal mover of the orchestrated effort to kill our president. And he has been following the National Archive issue and the release issues for some time. Dr. Corsi, welcome to the War Room.
Roger, great to be with you. Thank you very much. I want to say to begin with, Roger, we just want to say, first of all, congratulations to you. This everybody should realize that had you not discussed the issue with Donald Trump, and of course, we've been working on this for months. You and I have talked about it repeatedly, but you finally did get the opportunity to explain to President Trump why this was so important. And I really want to extend you my personal gratitude. I'm sure millions of Americans that were going to get the president's approval to have these documents released. I think it's very critical that we see all the documents, and I think it's inexcusable that we've had to wait over 50 years while they've still remained, many of them, classified.
Well, I appreciate your kind comments. As you know, no one tells Donald Trump what to do, but my 40-year experience with him is unbroken. When he has all of the information, he almost invariably makes a good decision. And he, in this case, ignored the pleas of the deep state to keep these documents secret for yet another 25 years. One can only assume that they do that because their methods and their actions have not changed since 1963. They would not look good in a balanced history of that dark chapter in our national tale. And today we have elements of the intelligence community leaking in violation of the law to undermine and destabilize President Trump. Now, you were the first one to point out to me that the next danger is for the deep state licking their wounds to redact and withhold so much of this material that what they are releasing becomes meaningless. Do you think that can really happen?
Well, I'm hoping that President Trump is now aware of the issue. I'm sure you discussed it with him. And if the deep state does try to protect itself further to continue engaging in the same kinds of completely unconstitutional and criminal behavior that was the case in the Kennedy assassination, which I'm convinced was a combination CIA mafia plot with, as we both agree, Lyndon Johnson's full agreement. Lyndon Johnson was the one who benefited. It was a coup d'etat, and the American people have been lied to. If these documents come out in such a redacted form that they're useless, President Trump has the authority to go back and demand that the documents be released in an unredacted form. In fact, the entire document dump could be released in an unredacted form, which means you'd be able to read all the documents with names, dates, agencies, etc. And that's critical to really establishing what happened. I mean, I'm sure the deep state's already destroyed thousands of documents that we'll never see, but at least in what remains, I think we're going to find some further confirmation that Lee Harvey Oswald was working hand in hand with the CIA at the time of the assassination, had been doing so since he was in James Angleton at the CIA's defector program as a Marine who defected to Russia as a counter agent, really a double agent working for the United States, and had always been working for the United States, also on the FBI's payroll at the time of the assassination. That came out in the closed meetings, the minutes of the meetings of the Warren Commission itself, something that Alan Dulles went into panic over and tried to prevent from being made public, the FBI connection to Lee Harvey Oswald. And we're going to find out a lot more about Cuba and Russia and this trip to Mexico that Lee Harvey Oswald made. I'm confident the deep state, had you not intervened with President Trump, and President Trump not made the right decision, which took a lot of courage, the deep state would have buried these documents for another 25 years simply because it does not want to expose what is increasingly apparent to the American people. The deep state is acting in a criminal fashion. And I think it's got to be put to an end, and hopefully this document dump will assist us in achieving that goal.
Well, you mentioned the Mexico City adventure, where it is alleged that Lee Harvey Oswald traveled to Mexico City, where he made appearances at the Soviet and the Cuban consulates. The problem with this is we also have the audio tape of a phone conversation between FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover and President Lyndon Johnson, in which Hoover tells Johnson the man seen in Mexico City doesn't bear any resemblance to the man who was arrested and subsequently murdered, Lee Harvey Oswald. So I am hopeful that the government's files will shed some light on that particular question. Philip Sheenan from the Washington Post yesterday was quoted as saying, "We know Oswald went to Mexico City where he met with both Cuban and Russian spies." I would say no. We know a man claiming to be Oswald went to Mexico City. And more than that, we do not know. if, as you know, Dr. Corsi, the last time there was a massive data dump like this, we learned that the KGB had conducted their own investigation into the Kennedy murder. They determined that Lyndon Johnson was the perp. We knew that French intelligence had conducted their own independent inquiry at the request of Jacqueline Kennedy. They also concluded that Lyndon Johnson was a ringleader. Johnson controlled the Dallas County District Attorney. Johnson controlled the Dallas City Police and the Dallas County Sheriff's Office. Murder in 1963 was a state, not federal crime. That put Lyndon Baines Johnson in firm control of the investigation and the cover-up. I do want to touch on one other thing, Dr. Corsi. You've had a series of brilliant articles about malfeasance in the Obama Justice Department, and you have focused on an incredible case of a man named William Billy Walters, a investor, philanthropist, and high-stakes gambler out of Las Vegas. The reason your stories are important, and I think you said it to me first, if President Trump wants to know what's about to happen to him, you said, he merely needs to look at what just happened to William Walters. With about 2 minutes left, can you lay this out for us?
Yes, and I'm going to be writing some more articles later this week and through next week on the Billy Walters case. Billy Walters was a very prominent businessman, an investor, a sports gambler, Las Vegas. He was investigated for insider trading, but the case was a complete setup. And it's really important because the court forced Pret Bharara, the U.S. attorney in the Southern District of New York, the prosecutor, to admit in writing in an unsealed and not redacted form that the FBI, as Agent Chavez, for 4 years had been leaking secret grand jury information to the press, including 2 years before Billy Walters was indicted. Now, this is completely criminal on the FBI's part. It's an indictment by newspaper, and it's the way, and by the way, Bharara is now consulting with Mueller. Mueller has hired one of Bharara's top prosecutors, and Donald Trump correctly has accused Mueller himself of leaking. This is the way the FBI, criminal malfeasance under the FBI, has been prosecuting cases, setting people up, not giving them a fair trial, leaking to the press, and Mueller is guilty. The pattern from Bharara in writing, admitting to the federal judge in the Billy Walters case, is the Rosetta Stone, which brings down Mueller and all the corrupt prosecutors under the Obama administration in the Department of Justice. It's a vitally important case.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jerry Corsi, the Washington Bureau Chief for InfoWars. I'm Roger Stone. Victory or death.